Hand cannons. The story starts in 13th century China. The Chinese had already invented gunpowder, and by the 1200s, they were using small, handheld metal tubes packed with powder and projectiles. These were called hand cannons. They had no trigger. You literally touched a burning stick or a hot wire to a small hole in the tube, called the touch hole, and it fired. One shot. Then you reloaded, which took minutes. By the 1300s, hand cannons had spread to Europe. Soldiers carried them, but they were clumsy, slow, and wildly inaccurate. Still, they were terrifying. The noise alone was a weapon. The key problem? Lighting a match while aiming a gun is not practical in combat. The matchlock. In the early 1400s, European gunsmiths solved the "how do we fire this without a third hand" problem with the matchlock mechanism. Here's how it worked. A slow-burning rope called a match was clamped into an S-shaped metal piece called a serpentine. When you pulled a lever, the serpentine dipped the burning match into a small pan of powder, called the flash pan, which ignited and fired the gun. This was the first true trigger system. For the first time, a soldier could aim and fire with both hands on the weapon. Matchlock pistols appeared by the mid-1400s. They were still slow to reload, and rain or wind could put out the match, which meant your gun was useless in bad weather. The wheellock. Around 1500, German gunsmiths invented the wheellock. Instead of a burning match, it used a spinning steel wheel that struck against iron pyrite, basically the same principle as a modern lighter. When you pulled the trigger, the wheel spun, created sparks, ignited the powder. No open flame needed. It was more reliable, more weatherproof, and faster. The wheellock made true pistols practical. The word pistol likely comes from the city of Pistoia in Italy, or from the Czech word pistola, depending on who you ask. Either way, the wheellock pistol became popular with cavalry. Soldiers on horseback could now carry and fire a handgun with one hand. But wheellocks were expensive and complex to manufacture. They were mostly for wealthy soldiers and nobles. The flintlock. The affordable, reliable solution came in the early 1600s with the flintlock. A piece of flint was clamped in a jaw. When you pulled the trigger, a spring flung the flint against a steel plate, called the frizzen, which produced sparks directly into the powder pan. Simpler, cheaper, and more reliable than the wheellock. Flintlock pistols dominated for over 200 years, from the 1600s all the way to the early 1800s. That's how significant this design was. Cavalry used flintlock pistols in duels, in war, and in self-defense. Pirates carried them. Explorers carried them. By the 1700s, officers carried flintlock pistols as a standard sidearm. The big limitation? Still single shot. Still slow to reload. A misfire rate of around 15 to 20% due to wet powder or worn flint. And reloading in the middle of a fight, pouring powder, placing a ball, ramming it down, was dangerous and slow. The percussion cap. In 1807, a Scottish minister named Alexander Forsyth patented a new ignition system using a chemical compound that detonated on impact. By the 1820s, this evolved into the percussion cap, a small copper cup filled with a pressure-sensitive chemical. You place the cap on a nipple at the back of the barrel. Pull the trigger, the hammer struck the cap, it detonated, fired the gun. No flint, no powder pan, no wind problems. Far more reliable. This replaced the flintlock rapidly. But guns were still single shot, still muzzle-loaded. The race was on to solve the reload problem. The revolver. In 1836, Samuel Colt patented the revolver. The idea of a rotating cylinder wasn't brand new, but Colt made it practical and mass-producible. The cylinder held multiple chambers, typically 5 or 6, each loaded with a round. As you cocked the hammer, the cylinder rotated, bringing a fresh chamber in line with the barrel. The Colt Patterson was the first. Then came the Colt Walker in 1847, a powerful revolver developed with Texas Ranger Captain Samuel Walker. Then the iconic Colt Single-Action Army in 1873, called the Peacemaker, the gun most associated with the American West. Revolvers were revolutionary. Multiple shots without reloading. Reliable. The percussion cap ignition made misfires rare. The limitation? You still had to manually cock the hammer for each shot in single-action revolvers. Metallic cartridges and semi-automatics. The next leap was the self-contained metallic cartridge, a single unit combining the bullet, powder, and primer in a brass case. This had been developing through the mid-1800s, and by the 1870s and 80s, it changed everything. Now, reloading was fast, clean, and reliable. This enabled the next evolution, the semi-automatic pistol. In 1893, Hugo Borchardt designed the first practical semi-automatic pistol, but the gun that truly defined the era was the Mauser C96 in 1896. Distinctive, powerful, and widely used. Then, in 1898, Georg Luger refined the design into what became the Luger P08, used by the German military in both world wars. Sleek, accurate. But the most influential semi-automatic of the 20th century was the Colt M1911, designed by John Moses Browning, adopted by the U.S. military in 1911. The 1911 fired the .45 ACP cartridge, held 7 rounds in the magazine, and remained the standard U.S. military sidearm for 74 years. Browning's short recoil-operated tilting barrel design became the template for almost every semi-automatic pistol that followed. Mid-20th century. World War II saw handguns used by officers and special forces across all sides. The Germans used the Walther P38, the Americans had the 1911, the Soviets carried the Tokarev TT-33. After the war, the Cold War era brought refinement and standardization. NATO sought a common sidearm. In 1955, Walther introduced the PP and PPK, compact double-action pistols favored by police and made famous by a certain fictional spy. The Soviets replaced the Tokarev with the Makarov PM in 1951, a simple, compact, ultra-reliable 9mm. Modern era. The biggest shift in modern handgun design came in 1982 when Gaston Glock, an engineer with no prior firearms experience, designed the Glock 17. It used a polymer frame, plastic, instead of steel. This made it lighter, cheaper, and corrosion-resistant. It had a striker-fired mechanism, meaning no external hammer. The safe action trigger system had 3 internal safeties but no manual safety lever, making it fast into action. The gun world was skeptical. Then, militaries and police departments adopted it. Today, the Glock is the most widely used law enforcement pistol in the world. Around the same time, Sig Sauer, Beretta, Smith & Wesson, and Heckler & Koch were all producing modern double-action semi-automatics. The Beretta M9 replaced the 1911 as the U.S. military sidearm in 1985, holding 15 rounds of 9mm. In the 2000s, striker-fired polymer pistols became dominant. High-capacity magazines, better ergonomics, improved sights, and accessory rails for lights and lasers became standard. Handguns in 2026. Today's handguns are more accurate, more reliable, and more modular than anything that came before. Pistols like the Sig Sauer P320, now the U.S. military standard sidearm as the M17/M18, feature modular designs where you can swap frames, grips, and slide assemblies. The same pistol can be a full-size service weapon or a compact carry gun by swapping components. Red dot optics mounted directly on pistol slides are now standard in military and competition shooting. What was rare a decade ago is now expected. Suppressor-ready models, pistols with threaded barrels, are increasingly common for civilian, law enforcement, and military use. Micro-compact pistols like the SIG P365 and Glock 43X pack 10 to 15 rounds into a gun small enough for concealed carry, something unthinkable 20 years ago. Smart gun technology, guns that only fire for authorized users using RFID or biometrics, exists but hasn't achieved mainstream adoption yet. And ammunition continues to evolve. Modern hollow-point defensive rounds perform at a level that would seem impossible to anyone from even 50 years ago.